Some mistakes cost a little, others cost everything. For a ruthless billionaire accustomed to absolute power, the mistake was underestimating the waitress serving his table. A casual, cruel insult about her accent, meant to amuse his friends and assert his dominance, was the trigger. He couldn't have known who she really was. He couldn't have known about the secret promise that tied her directly to the one ghost from his past. He could never escape. This is the story of how 10 quiet words ignited a firestorm, proving that a person's dignity can be a far more valuable asset than a $10 billion empire. The restaurant was called Aurelia, a name that dripped with the same old-world gold as the leafing on its vaulted ceilings. It was less a place to eat and more a theatre of wealth, where conversations were held in hushed, confident tones, and the clinking of silverware on porcelain was a delicate, percussive score. For the patrons, it was an escape. For the staff, it was the gilded cage. Isabella Rossi knew the cage better than anyone. 5 nights a week, she donned the crisp black uniform, tied her dark, wavy hair into a severe but elegant knot and transformed. She became a ghost of perfect service, her movements economical and graceful, her presence felt but never intrusive. Her colleagues, a mix of aspiring actors, students and career waiters, admired her unflappable calm. They mistook her quietness for meekness, her focus for subservience. They were wrong. Her calm was a shield forged in a life she'd left behind in a small, sun-drenched town on the Amalfi Coast. Her accent, a soft, melodic lilt that rounded the sharp edges of English, was the last remnant of that life, a life of vibrant colours, the scent of lemon groves, and the warm, calloused hands of her grandfather, a master artisan who restored Renaissance art. He had taught her that patience and a steady hand could mend any crack, reveal any hidden beauty. It was a lesson she applied to canvases and to life. She was in New York to follow in his footsteps, studying art conservation at the prestigious Institute of Fine Arts. Aurelia, with its exorbitant prices and generous if often condescending clientele, was the only way she could afford the city and the specialized tuition. She endured the long hours, the sore feet, and the occasional entitled diner by mentally dissecting the restaurant's opulent decor, the flawed brushwork on a replica landscape, the cheap gilding masquerading as gold. It was her private, defiant game. Tonight was different. A palpable tension crackled through the air, thicker than the aroma of truffle and aged wine. The source of it was a reservation for 4 at €8 p.m. under the name Sterling. Damien Sterling. The name was an earthquake in the financial world. A titan of private equity, Sterling wasn't old money. He was a storm of new money forged in the fires of hostile takeovers and ruthless asset stripping. He bought beloved companies, gutted them for profit, and sold the hollowed-out husks, leaving communities and careers in ruins. His photograph was a regular feature in financial magazines, sharp suit, sharper jawline, and eyes that looked like chips of glacial ice. He was famously intolerant of incompetence and possessed a temper that had become the stuff of corporate legend. The manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose natural state was a low-grade panic, had gathered the evening staff for a pre-shift briefing that felt more like a pre-battle speech. "Listen up, everyone," he'd said, wringing his hands. "The Sterling party is in Isabella's section. Table 12, the best view. I want flawless service. Not just good, not just excellent flawless. No delays, no mistakes. Water glasses never fall below half full. Bread baskets are always replenished. Isabella," he said, turning to her, "you're my best. You're calm under pressure. But with him, just be invisible. Anticipate what he wants. before he knows he wants it. And whatever you do, do not engage in conversation unless directly addressed. Isabella had simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She'd handled difficult men before, arrogant men who thought their money gave them ownership of the space around them, including the people in it. Damien Sterling would be no different, just a more expensive, more dangerous version of the same tired archetype. At precisely 8:00 p.m. he arrived. He didn't walk into Aurelia, he conquered it. The ambient chatter of the room seemed to dip as he swept in, flanked by two younger men in identical slick suits and a woman in a red dress so tight it looked like a second skin. Sterling himself was dressed in a charcoal suit, so perfectly tailored, it seemed less like clothing and more like a second, more formidable skin. He was taller than his photos suggested, and his presence sucked the air out of the room. Isabella watched from her station as Henderson practically genuflected, leading them to table 12. She took a deep, steadying breath, picked up 4 menus and a silver water pitcher, and began the long walk across the marble floor. The sound of her sensible, polished black shoes seemed deafening in her own ears. "Good evening," she began, her voice low and even as she approached the table. "Welcome to Aurelia. May I start you with some water? We have still or sparkling." Damien Sterling didn't even look at her. He was scrolling through his phone, one eyebrow slightly arched in annoyance at the interruption. One of the younger men, a sycophant named Kyle, answered for him. "Still water for Mr. Sterling. The rest of us will have sparkling." Isabella moved with practiced efficiency, pouring the still water into Sterling's glass first. As she leaned in a drop, a single errant drop of condensation from the cold pitcher slid down the silver and landed silently on the pristine white tablecloth, a minuscule dark spot less than a foot from Sterling's hand. It was nothing. A millimeter of moisture that would evaporate in minutes. No one else noticed. But Damien Sterling noticed everything. His eyes, cold and sharp, flicked from his phone to the tablecloth, then slowly, dismissively up to Isabella's face. He didn't speak. He simply held her gaze for a moment, a look of such profound contempt on his face that it was like a physical blow. Then he looked back at his phone, a tiny, disdainful smirk playing on his lips, a clear dismissal. She was less than nothing. Isabella felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, but her expression remained a mask of professional neutrality. She finished pouring the water for the other guests, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. "I will return momentarily to take your drink orders," she said to the table at large, her voice unchanged. As she turned to walk away, she heard Sterling's voice for the first time. It was a low, gravelly baritone, dripping with condescension. He wasn't speaking to her, but to his companions, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Can you believe the service in this place? You pay a fortune, and they can't even hire people who can handle a water pitcher." He paused for effect. "Or speak the language properly." The woman in red giggled. Kyle the sycophant chimed in. "It's that accent, sir. Hard to understand what she's even saying. Sounds like she just got off a boat." The insult hung in the air, ugly and sharp. It wasn't just about the drop of water. It was about her origin, her voice, her very being. Every head in the vicinity discreetly turned. Mr. Henderson, watching from across the room, looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. He started moving towards the table, ready to apologize, to grovel, to offer them anything. Isabella stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face, replaced by an icy calm. The shield she had so carefully maintained for years didn't just crack, it vaporized. The years of quiet endurance, of swallowing pride, of smiling through casual cruelties, it all coalesced into a single point of white-hot clarity. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, not about mending cracks, but about recognizing rot. She turned around slowly. Her back was straight, her chin high. She looked directly at Damien Sterling, who finally deigned to give her his full attention, a cruel, amused glint in his eyes. He was enjoying this. He was waiting for her to crumble, to apologize, to cry. He was waiting for her to prove him right. The entire room was holding its breath. The clinking of silverware had stopped. The hushed conversations had ceased. There was only the low hum of the air conditioning and the thumping of Isabella's heart. She met his icy gaze with her own, which were suddenly not the eyes of a timid waitress, but of someone who had seen empires rise and fall on canvas, who understood the eternal nature of dignity and the fleeting corrosive nature of arrogance. Her voice when she spoke was not loud. It was perfectly clear, devoid of any tremor, and carried across the silent room. The melodic lilt of her accent was still there, but now it sounded less like a weakness and more like the deliberate chiming notes of a bell. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her tone level and formal. "Your father taught me better manners than that." 10 words. They landed in the dead silence of the room, like 10 stones dropped into a frozen lake. The silence that followed Isabella's words was different from the one that had preceded them. The first was a silence of anticipation. This was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. It was as if she had pulled the pin from a grenade and rolled it onto the center of the table. Damien Sterling's smirk vanished, wiped clean from his face as if by a physical blow. His eyes, moments before, filled with cruel amusement, widened almost imperceptibly. The glacial ice cracked, revealing a flicker of something utterly foreign to his public persona confusion. His jaw, usually set in a line of arrogant certainty, went slack. His guests were equally stunned. Kyle's mouth hung slightly ajar, the sycophantic grin frozen in place. The woman in red looked from Isabella to Sterling, and back again, her brow furrowed. They didn't understand the words, not really, but they understood the effect. The power dynamic at the table so firmly established moments ago had been obliterated. Mr. Henderson, who had been rushing over to intervene, stopped dead in his tracks about 10 feet away. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He looked at Isabella with a new kind of horror. She hadn't just broken his primary rule, do not engage. She had taken a sledgehammer to it. Isabella herself stood perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She held Damien Sterling's gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. In that moment, she was no longer a waitress. She was an equal. No, she was more. She had seized a power he didn't know she possessed. It was Sterling who broke the spell. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous snarl that was meant for her alone. "What did you just say?" His voice was a razor's edge. He was reasserting his dominance, trying to regain control of the narrative of the room. Isabella did not flinch. "I believe you heard me clearly, sir," she replied, her voice still quiet, still firm. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Now, if you will excuse me. My manager appears to be in some distress." Without waiting for a response, she turned with a quiet dignity and walked directly toward the petrified Mr. Henderson, leaving Sterling staring at her retreating back. It was the ultimate power move. She had delivered the blow and then dismissed him, leaving him to grapple with the shrapnel. "Isabella, my office now," Henderson hissed, grabbing her arm and practically dragging her towards the kitchen doors. As they disappeared, the spell over the restaurant broke. A wave of frantic, hushed whispers erupted. "What did she say? Did you hear that? His father?" Damien Sterling slammed his hand down on the table, not hard enough to be truly violent, but loud enough to silence the room once more. The sound was a thunderclap of pure rage. Get me the manager!" He seethed to Kyle, his face a dark mask of fury. Meanwhile, in the cramped, cluttered office behind the bustling kitchen, Mr. Henderson was pacing like a caged animal. "Are you insane?" he screeched, his voice cracking. "Do you have any idea who that is? That is Damien Sterling. He could buy this restaurant tomorrow morning, just to have the pleasure of firing every single one of us, starting with me and ending with you. He could destroy my life with a single phone call." Isabella stood by the door, her composure beginning to fray now that she was out of the public eye. A fine tremor ran through her hands. "He insulted me, Mr. Henderson. He insulted my home, my heritage." "I don't care if he insulted your sainted grandmother." Henderson shot back, his face red. "Your job is to smile and take it. That's the deal we serve, they pay. We're invisible, they're gods. You know the rules." "Isabella, there are some things that are not part of the deal," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "Dignity is not on the menu." "Dignity doesn't pay the rent," he yelled. "Pack your things. You're fired. Get your things from your locker and get out. I don't want to see your face when he comes back here." Isabella felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. The tuition payment was due in 2 weeks. This job, this gilded cage, was her lifeline. But even as the fear washed over her, it was followed by a strange sense of peace. She had stood up for herself. For the first time in a long time, she hadn't swallowed the poison. "Fine," she said softly. Before Henderson could respond, the office door burst open. Damien Sterling stood there, his 6'2" frame filling the doorway, his presence radiating a palpable menacing energy. His 2 associates hovered behind him like vultures. He ignored Henderson completely, his glacial eyes locking on to Isabella. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice dangerously low. "We need to talk." He turned his head slightly, finally acknowledging the manager. "Get out." It wasn't a request. Mr. Henderson, despite being in his own office, scurried out without a word, nearly tripping over a stack of receipt books. The door clicked shut, leaving Isabella alone in the tiny room with Damien Sterling and his silent henchmen. The small office suddenly felt airless, claustrophobic. The sounds of the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the shouting of chefs were muffled, distant. Sterling took a step forward, invading her personal space. He was close enough that she could smell the expensive, subtle cologne. He wore a scent of sandalwood and something cold, like ozone after a lightning strike. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, enunciating each word with venomous precision. "How do you know my father?" The name Arthur Sterling was a holy name in Damien's world. Arthur had been the opposite of his son. He was a brilliant engineer, a man of quiet integrity, who had built a small but respected manufacturing firm from the ground up. He believed in quality craftsmanship and loyalty to his employees. He had died 2 years ago, leaving behind a legacy of honor that Damien both revered and resented. He had spent his entire life trying to escape his father's long shadow by building an empire so vast and brutal it would eclipse Arthur's gentle light. Isabella looked at the face of the man who had inherited Arthur's features, but none of his grace. She saw the deep, unresolved grief and anger churning beneath the surface. "I knew him," she said simply. "He was a kind man." "Don't play games with me." Sterling snapped, his control breaking. "My father was a private man. He didn't spend his time with waitresses." The word was another insult spat from his lips with disgust. He was trying to put her back in her box, to re-establish the hierarchy. "Perhaps he was a better judge of character than you are," Isabella retorted, the fire returning to her. "Perhaps he preferred the company of people who create things to those who only know how to destroy them." The barb hit its mark. Damien recoiled as if slapped. He stared at her, a storm of emotions crossing his face, rage, disbelief, and a sliver of something that looked like pain. "Who are you?" he whispered, the question raw and genuine this time. Isabella lifted her chin. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of profound, weary certainty. The secret she had guarded for 2 years, the promise she had made, was about to be broken. But he had left her no choice. "My name is Isabella Rossi," she said. "And your father, Mr. Sterling, was my patron. He discovered my work, restoring a damaged fresco in a small church near Ravello. He called my talent a gift. He paid for my education here in New York. He said I had the hands of an artist, not a servant." She let the words sink in. Each one was a careful, deliberate brush stroke, painting a picture that was shaking Damien Sterling's world to its foundations. He looked at her not as a waitress, but as a ghost from his father's past, a puzzle he couldn't comprehend. "You're lying," he hissed, but the accusation lacked conviction. His mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. His father's frequent trips to Italy in his last years, trips he'd dismissed as sentimental journeys, the withdrawals from his personal accounts that his accountants could never fully explain. "Am I?" Isabella replied, reaching into the small handbag she'd been allowed to keep in the office. She pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, she carefully extracted a faded, folded piece of paper, a letter. She unfolded it and held it out to him. "He wrote to me a week before he passed away," she said. "I think you'll recognize the handwriting." Damien Sterling stared at the letter, as if it were a venomous snake. Slowly, hesitantly, his hand reached out and took it. His fingers, which could sign away the fates of thousands of employees with a flick of a pen, trembled slightly as they closed around the paper. The air in the small office was thick with the unspoken history contained in the single sheet of paper Damien Sterling now held. The letter was written on his father's personal stationery, the heavy, cream-colored stock embossed with a simple A.S. The handwriting was unmistakable, the elegant, slightly slanted cursive of Arthur Sterling, a script as precise and deliberate as the man himself. Damien's eyes scanned the first few lines, his expression shifting from furious skepticism to stunned disbelief. "My dearest Isabella, the city air does not agree with me, but the thought of your progress brings me a warmth that these old bones haven't felt in some time. I saw the photographs of your work on the Titian study. You have not just restored the pigment, you have restored its soul. You see the light behind the paint. It is a rare gift, one I am humbled to be able to nurture." He read on his face, growing paler with every word. The letter was deeply personal, filled with encouragement, artistic advice, and paternal affection. It spoke of their shared love for the Renaissance masters, of Arthur's belief in her unflinching integrity, and his hope that she would one day run the conservation department at a major museum. It was a letter filled with a pride and tenderness that Damien himself had seldom received. The final paragraph was the one that stopped his heart. "I worry about Damien. He has built an empire of glass and steel, but I fear his own foundation is made of sand. He chases shadows believing them to be substance. He mistakes fear for respect. My greatest regret is that I could not teach him that a man's true worth is measured not by what he acquires, but by what he creates and protects. In you, Isabella, I see the spirit of creation I wished for my own son. Be well, my child. Continue to make the world more beautiful. Yours, Arthur." Damien finished the letter and stood motionless, the paper hanging from his fingertips. The words were a posthumous judgment from the one man whose opinion still mattered to him. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. This whole time, his father, whom he'd believed was spending his final years in quiet retirement, had been mentoring a replacement. A secret project. An artistic daughter who embodied everything he was not. The rage returned, but this time it was different. It was the hot, desperate rage of betrayal. He felt like a fool. "A patron." He said the words, tasting like acid. He crumpled the letter in his fist. "So you were his little project, a charity case he picked up in Italy. How much did you get out of him? How much did my father pay you to listen to his sentimental ramblings?" He was lashing out, trying to wound her, to diminish the significance of the letter, to reframe her as a common grifter. Isabella watched the letter she cherished be crushed in his hand, and her own anger rose to meet his. "He paid my tuition," she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "And he gave me something you clearly wouldn't understand, his respect. Your father didn't see me as a charity case, Mr. Sterling. He saw me as an artist. He spoke to me about pigments and brush strokes, about history and beauty. Did he ever speak to you about anything other than profit margins and stock prices?" Her question was a dagger aimed with precision at the heart of his lifelong insecurity. He had always known deep down that his father viewed his financial empire with a kind of sad disdain. Arthur Sterling had attended only one of Damien's celebratory galas. He had walked through the gleaming marble halls of Sterling Holdings, looked at the frantic traders and charts of skyrocketing profits, and had quietly said, "It's all very loud, son," before leaving early. "You know nothing about my father," Damien snarled, taking a menacing step closer. "I know he was a man who believed in building things to last." Isabella shot back, undaunted. And he was heartbroken that his own son only knew how to tear them down. The raw truth of her words silenced him more effectively than any threat could have. He stared at her, his mind reeling. This waitress, this girl with the strange melodic accent he had mocked, held a piece of his father's soul that he had never been granted access to. She was a living testament to his own failure in his father's eyes. Suddenly the restaurant office felt too small, too confining. He needed air. He needed to be back in his own world where he was in control. "Gavin!" He barked, not taking his eyes off Isabella. One of the men behind him, his head of security, stepped forward. "I want to know everything about her. Isabella Rossi, where she lives, where she studies, who her friends are, what she had for breakfast this morning. I want to know if she has a library card. I want to know everything. Use whatever resources you need." "Yes, sir," Gavin said, his voice flat and professional. Damien turned his furious gaze back to Isabella. "This isn't over," he promised, his voice a low threat. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." He spun on his heel and stormed out of the office, his two associates trailing in his wake like pilot fish after a shark. He didn't say a word to Mr. Henderson, didn't spare a glance for the gawking staff or patrons. He swept out of Aurelia, leaving behind a shattered silence, a crumpled letter, and a world of chaos. Isabella finally let out the breath she had been holding. Her legs felt weak, and she leaned against the filing cabinet for support. Mr. Henderson cautiously poked his head back into the office. "Isabella, I don't know what to say. You can start by telling me if I still have a job," she said wearily. Henderson looked at the empty doorway through which a billionaire had just stormed, then back at the young woman who had caused the hurricane. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a strength he had never recognized before. He also possessed a keen instinct for self-preservation. Damien Sterling had told her, "You're not going anywhere." Firing her now seemed like a far more dangerous proposition than keeping her. Just finish your shift, Rossi," he mumbled, bewildered. "And try not to start any more international incidents." The next few days were a strange purgatory for Isabella. She went to her classes at the Institute, her hand steady as she worked on her current project, restoring a 17th century portrait damaged by smoke. But her mind was elsewhere. She felt a constant sense of being watched. A black sedan was often parked across the street from her apartment building in Brooklyn. Sometimes she would see a man in a nondescript suit a few tables away at the coffee shop where she studied. She wasn't being subtle. Sterling wanted her to know he was digging. He wanted her to be afraid. She confided in her roommate and best friend Chloe, an energetic and fiercely loyal dance student. "A billionaire is stalking you because you knew his dad." Chloe asked, her eyes wide, as they sat in their small, cluttered living room that smelled perpetually of turpentine and rosin. "Izzy, this is either the plot of a terrible romantic comedy or a terrifying thriller." "Right now it feels like the thriller," Isabella admitted, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea. "He looked at me like he wanted to erase me from existence." "But why? Because his dad liked you?" "That's insane. It's not like you were his secret lover." "No, nothing like that," Isabella said quickly. "Arthur, he was like the grandfather I lost. He saw a kindred spirit. With Damien, it's not about jealousy over a woman. It's about legacy. I think his father's approval of me feels like a disapproval of him." "So what are you going to do?" Chloe asked. "What can I do?" Isabella sighed. "I go to work, I go to school, and I wait for the other shoe to drop." The shoe dropped 3 days later. It wasn't the confrontational explosion she expected, but something far more chilling and calculated. She was leaving the library at the Institute when a man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped in front of her. It wasn't one of the men from the restaurant. This one was older, with silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He carried a leather briefcase. "Miss Isabella Rossi?" he asked, his voice calm and polite. Isabella tensed. "Who's asking?" "My name is Alistair Finch. I was Arthur Sterling's personal attorney and the executor of his estate," he said. "I believe we need to talk. Mr. Damien Sterling contacted me yesterday. He has questions, and based on what he told me, an event has been triggered that I am legally obligated to address with you." The man's words were precise, formal, and utterly terrifying. "An event triggered." Isabella repeated, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "What are you talking about?" Alistair Finch gave her a small, sympathetic smile. "It's complicated, Miss Rossi. It's probably best we discuss this somewhere private. It concerns the last will and testament of Arthur Sterling. Specifically, a rather unconventional codicil he added a month before he passed, a codicil that involves you directly." Alistair Finch suggested a quiet cafe, a few blocks from the Institute. It was an old place, with dark wood paneling and the comforting smell of coffee beans and old books. The setting was calm, but Isabella's mind was a maelstrom, a codicil, an event that had been triggered. The legalistic word sounded ominous final. They sat in a secluded booth in the back. Finch ordered 2 black coffees and waited until the server had left before opening his briefcase. He was the epitome of an old-school lawyer, deliberate, discreet, and radiating an aura of sober authority. "Miss Rossi," he began, his voice low. "First allow me to say that Arthur spoke of you often and with enormous affection. He considered you one of the brightest lights to enter his life in his later years. He would be deeply dismayed to know of the circumstances of your meeting with his son." "Mr. Sterling was unpleasant," Isabella said, a massive understatement. "Damien can be more than unpleasant," Finch corrected gently. "He can be cruel. Arthur knew this. It was, as he once put it to me, his greatest sorrow. He loved his son, but he was not blind to his failings. Which brings us to the matter at hand. From his briefcase, he retrieved a thick document bound in a blue folder. He laid it on the table between them. This is a copy of Arthur's will. Most of it is straightforward. His personal effects, his properties, his charitable trusts. The bulk of his liquid assets went to Damien, of course. But Arthur's most valuable asset was not his money. Finch paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Arthur's foundational asset was his 35% controlling interest in Sterling Manufacturing, the original company he built from the ground up. It was his legacy. It has since been absorbed into the larger Sterling Holdings conglomerate, but that block of shares remains a distinct and powerful entity. It grants a seat on the board and effective veto power over any major strategic decisions of the entire parent company. It is the bedrock of Damien's empire. Isabella listened, confused. What does this have to do with me? Everything, Finch said, his eyes locking on hers. Arthur did not leave that 35% stake to Damien, not directly. He opened the folder and turned it so she could see. He pointed to a section titled Codicil Addendum 7B, the Keystone Trust. Arthur placed his entire 35% share in a private sealed trust. Finch explained, his voice even. He assigned me as the trustee. The terms of the trust were explicit and unusual. Damien was to retain voting control of the shares and receive the dividends under one condition, that he conduct his life and business in a manner that would not bring dishonor upon the Sterling family name. Dishonor, Isabella whispered. Arthur defined it very specifically. Finch continued, a grim set to his mouth. He called it the moral clause. The trust would remain in effect unless Damien committed a public act of wanton cruelty, arrogance, or dishonor that profaned the principles of integrity and respect upon which Arthur had built his name. If such an act were to occur and be verified by me as trustee, he took a deep breath. In that event, the trust would be immediately dissolved. The beneficiary status would transfer, and the entire 35% controlling interest in Sterling Manufacturing, along with the board seat and all its power, would pass irrevocably to a new party. Finch looked at her, his expression a mixture of legal duty and profound sympathy. The new beneficiary, Miss Rossi, is you. Isabella stared at him. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds disconnected from reality. It felt like he was speaking a foreign language. The hum of the cafe, the clink of a cup in the distance, the smell of coffee, it all seemed to warp and distort. Me, she finally managed to say, her voice a faint echo. That's impossible. Why, I barely knew him for 2 years. Why would he do that? Because you were not just his protégé, Finch said softly. You became his hope. He saw in you the values he had failed to instill in his son. Integrity, humility, a respect for legacy. He didn't create this codicil to punish Damien. He created it as a fail-safe, a moral tripwire. He hoped it would never be triggered. He hoped Damien would, in his absence, finally grow into the man he was meant to be. He set up a test, praying his son would pass. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. And the incident at the restaurant was the triggering event, Finch confirmed. Damien's public humiliation of you for no reason other than his own arrogance was a textbook violation of the moral clause. But I needed verification. I am a lawyer, after all. I require proof. So how did you... An old friend of mine, Mrs. Gable, happened to be dining at Aurelia that night, Finch said with a slight wry smile. She is a notorious gossip, but impeccably honest. She was appalled by Mr. Sterling's behavior and your remarkable response. She called my wife the next morning to tell her the story. when Damien himself called me yesterday, filled with rage and demanding to know about his father's secret Italian artist. He unwittingly provided the final confirmation I needed. Isabella's mind was reeling. The insult, the 10 words, the confrontation. It wasn't just a moment of personal drama. It was the key turning in a lock she never knew existed. Arthur Sterling hadn't just been her patron. He had, in his own strange, posthumous way, made her his champion. He had armed her with a power she could barely comprehend, the power to bring Damien Sterling to his knees. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Now I execute the will," Finch said simply. "I have already filed the preliminary paperwork with the board. A meeting has been called for Friday morning. Damien has been notified. As of Friday, you, Miss Isabella Rossi, will be the single largest shareholder in Sterling Manufacturing and a member of the board of Sterling Holdings." The reality of it crashed into her. The art student, the waitress, the immigrant saving for tuition, was about to become one of the most powerful players in a multi-billion-dollar corporation run by the man who had tried to crush her spirit. I don't want it," she stammered, shaking her head. The thought was terrifying. "I'm an art restorer, not a businesswoman. I don't know anything about private equity or hostile takeovers." "Arthur knew that," Finch said. "He wrote in a private memo to me that he did not expect you to run the company. He expected you to be its conscience. He trusted your character, not your business acumen." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Miss Rossi Damien knows. He knows what he has lost and to whom he has lost it. He is not a man who accepts defeat. He is cornered, and a cornered predator is at his most dangerous. You need to be prepared." Finch's words were still echoing in her ears when her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. The number was blocked. A cold sense of dread washed over her. She knew who it was. With a trembling hand, she answered. "Hello." There was silence for a moment, then the low, gravelly voice she now knew so well. It was stripped of its usual arrogance, replaced by a chilling, deathly calm. "My office." "1 hour," Damien Sterling said. "We have something to discuss." He hung up before she could reply. The headquarters of Sterling Holdings was a monument to brutalist modernism, a skyscraper of black glass and steel that stabbed at the sky, casting a long shadow over the older, more graceful buildings of Midtown. It was a physical manifestation of Damien Sterling's entire philosophy: overwhelm, dominate, and blot out the sun. Isabella had never felt so small. Dressed in her best clothes, a simple black dress, and a blazer she'd bought for scholarship interviews, she walked across the cavernous marble lobby. The air was cool and smelled of money and ambition. Men and women in sharp suits moved with a predatory swiftness, their faces grim and focused. No one smiled. Gavin, the silent head of security from the restaurant, was waiting for her by the elevator bank. He didn't speak, simply nodded and gestured for her to enter a private elevator. The ride to the penthouse floor was silent and swift. Her ears popped as they ascended. It felt like a journey to another world, a cold, airless Olympus where gods of capital made their judgments. The elevator doors opened directly into Damien Sterling's office. The room was immense, with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, god-like view of the city below. The furniture was stark, modern, and ruthlessly expensive. There was no art on the walls, only a series of framed magazine covers featuring Damien's face, Forbes, Fortune, the Wall Street Journal. They were his trophies. Damien was not sitting behind his massive obsidian desk. He was standing by the window, his back to her, looking down at the city he owned. He was in his shirt sleeves, his suit jacket slung over a chair. For the first time, He looked less like an untouchable titan and more like a man who had just received the worst news of his life. He didn't turn when she entered. He spoke to her reflection in the glass. "My father was a master of games," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Chess was his favorite. He always thought 3 moves ahead. It seems he was still playing even from the grave." He turned around slowly. The rage was gone. The contempt was gone. His eyes, which she remembered as chips of ice, were now dark and turbulent like a stormy sea. He looked exhausted. "A moral clause," he said, the corner of his mouth twisting in a bitter, mirthless smile. "Of course. How very Arthur Sterling. He builds me a throne and then hides a trap door underneath it with a rope in the hands of a stranger." He gestured to one of the 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Sit." Isabella sat her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. She felt strangely calm. The fear had receded, replaced by a heavy sense of destiny, of a story reaching its inevitable conclusion. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice raw. The question was not an accusation, but a genuine inquiry. "Is it money? Name your price. I'll buy the shares back from you. I'll set you up for life, 10 lives. You'll never have to work again. You can have your own art foundation, your own museum. Just name the number." He was back on familiar ground, our negotiation. Every problem could be solved with money. Every person had a price. Isabella looked at this powerful broken man and felt a surprising flicker of something that was almost pity. He truly didn't understand. "This was never about money, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Not for me and not for your father." "Don't tell me what this was about for my father." He snapped, a flash of the old anger returning. He was a hypocrite, a man who preached integrity while setting up his own son to fail. He put a gun in your hand and pointed it at my head. "He didn't give me a gun," Isabella countered, leaning forward slightly. "He gave me a mirror, and he pointed it at you." Damien stared at her, the words sinking in. He walked over to his desk and collapsed into his chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time. He looked defeated. "Why you?" he asked again, the question that haunted him. "Of all the people in the world, why a waitress from Italy?" "Maybe because I didn't want anything from him," she said simply. "I admired his mind and his spirit, not his bank account. We talked about art, about beauty, about things that last. He told me once that restoring a painting was an act of faith. You have to believe that the original beauty is still there, underneath the grime and the cracks. You just have to have the patience to find it." She paused, letting the metaphor settle in the air between them. "I think he always had faith that the man he wanted you to be was still in there somewhere, underneath. All of this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent office, at the city below, at the empire he had built. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the city. Damien Sterling, the ruthless corporate raider, the man who never lost, looked down at his hands on the obsidian desk. He looked small. "He left me a letter," Damien said, quietly, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "Finch gave it to me this morning. It was to be opened only in the event the codicil was triggered." He didn't look at her. He was speaking to the ghost of his father. It just said, "Now, perhaps you will listen." Isabella's heart ached for him, for the boy who had never been able to please his father, and the man who had never been able to forgive him. "So," he said finally, looking up, his eyes cleared of their storm, leaving behind a vast, empty exhaustion. "What happens now, Miss Rossi? You hold the keystone, you pull it, and the whole arch collapses." "My arch?" Is that what you want, to destroy what I've built, just as your father, just as my father planned? Here it was. The moment of decision. The power was hers. She could walk away with a fortune. She could take revenge for the humiliation, for the arrogance. She could destroy him, fulfilling Arthur's final desperate gambit. Or she could do what she did best. She could restore. "No," she said. "I am not in the business of destruction." She stood up and walked to the great window, looking down at the sprawling city. "I don't want your company, Mr. Sterling. I don't want your money, and I don't want revenge." She turned back to face him. "But I won't give the shares back to you. They weren't a gift to me. They were a responsibility." She took a deep breath. "This is my offer. The 35% stake will be placed into a new foundation, the Arthur Sterling Foundation for the Arts. Its mission will be to fund education and provide grants for young artists and conservators, people like me from all over the world. It will be his true legacy." Damien stared at her, speechless. "The foundation will retain the board seat." She continued, her voice gaining strength, the voice of a woman who had found her power. "And I will be its chairperson. But I will not do it alone." She looked him directly in the eye. "You will serve on the board with me. You will help me run it. You will lend your business expertise not to strip assets, but to build a legacy of creation and patronage, the one your father always wanted. You will learn to measure worth in brushstrokes and canvases, not just dollars and cents. You will help me make the world more beautiful." It was an audacious proposal, an ultimatum born not of greed, but of grace. She wasn't taking his power away. She was forcing him to use it differently. She was offering him not destruction, but a path to redemption. For a long moment, Damien Sterling said nothing. He simply looked at this incredible woman who had weathered his storm and answered with a lighthouse. He saw the strength his father had seen. He saw the integrity. He saw the chance, perhaps the last one he would ever get, to finally listen. A slow nod was his first response. Then he spoke, his voice, quiet, humbled, and for the first time since she had met him, completely sincere. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Isabella." It was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new one, a story of restoration, not just of old paintings, but of a family's honor, a father's hope, and a son's soul. All because a billionaire insulted a waitress, and she responded with 10 words that brought the walls of his kingdom crashing down, only to show him how to rebuild them with a stronger foundation. And so, a battle that began with a cruel insult in a high-end restaurant ended not with destruction, but with creation. It's a powerful reminder that our words have consequences we can't possibly foresee, and that true strength isn't about how high you can climb, but how you treat the people you meet along the way. Damien Sterling learned that the hard way, but in losing control of his empire, he gained a chance to reclaim his humanity. The waitress he tried to humiliate became the architect of his redemption. What did you think of Isabella's final decision? Was it justice? Was it mercy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of quiet strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that prove truth is often more incredible than fiction. Thank you for listening.